The far north has its own kind of silence. It is not the hush of a sleeping forest, nor the lull of a still sea. It is the quiet of snow falling endlessly, of winds curling over white hills and vanishing into an endless pale horizon. A quiet so deep that every sound feels stolen. The groan of ice beneath your boots, the slow sigh of pines swaying under their burden of frost, the muted thump of snow sliding from a heavy branch. Here the air is always sharp. It catches in your throat, laces your lashes with silver, and bites your skin until you feel both awake and faint with cold. The wind does not simply pass. It lingers against you, tasting your warmth as if it could drink it from your bones. It runs its fingers, invisible, glacial, through your hair, along the nape of your neck, and you can almost imagine it breathing, almost imagine it watching. In the villages scattered along these frozen lands, there is a story carried in whispers. It is told by firelight when the storms moan against the shutters, and told by mothers to restless children to make them stay close to home. The elders claim it is older than memory itself, a truth disguised as a tale. It says the north wind is not a mere current of air, nor an empty howl in the night. He is a spirit, vast and ancient, with a heart colder than the deepest ice, and yet capable of a strange, consuming love. Once, in every 100 winters, he chooses a mortal bride. No one agrees on how he chooses. Some say he seeks beauty. Others say courage. The oldest voices say it is not either, that he seeks something rarer still, a soul that yearns for him before it even knows his name. The chosen woman is taken to his palace of ice and cloud, where the auroras dance as torches in the halls and the stars burn close enough to touch. She is given eternity, never to age, never to hunger, never to feel the damp weight of mortal sorrow again. But she will never set foot on earth again.
The villagers tell of those who vanished in blizzards, of footprints that led away into the white and never returned. They say the wind carries voices if you listen too long, calling in a tongue you almost understand. Sometimes in the heart of winter, when the moon glows pale as bone, the north wind himself will pass low over the rooftops. Dogs grow restless, shutters bang, and women feel a shiver, not of fear, but of something far more dangerous. It is dangerous to admit you long for him. The elders frown at such talk. But deep in the hearts of those who dream too vividly, there is a private ache when the frost gathers on the windows, a wondering of what it might be like to be chosen. And perhaps, if the legends are true, the north wind can sense that wondering. Perhaps he tastes it in the air the way he tastes the scent of a coming snow. There is one more part of the tale, the part told only in murmurs when the children have gone to bed. They say that the north wind's love is unlike mortal love, that when he claims his bride, his touch is not warm but thrilling with cold, a cold that seeps not to harm but to claim, that his kiss feels like standing at the very edge of the world, where the air is thin and the earth falls away, and the only thing holding you is him. Some claim that the women he takes go willingly in the end, that they follow him into the white without a backward glance, that to look into his eyes, gray as a storm sky, bright with shards of ice, is to forget the sun. In this village there lives one such woman who dreams of more than the familiar. Her name is not yet important to the story, for in the beginning she is like any other, tending the fire, mending the nets, walking the same narrow paths between home and the frozen lake. But something in her carries a restless pulse. She watches the horizon when the wind rises, her cheeks flushed not only from cold. She has heard the stories all her life, but unlike the others, she does not scoff nor shudder. When the wind presses against her coat as if to wrap around her, she does not pull away. She closes her eyes and listens. The elders say the north wind only comes in the darkest part of winter, when the snow lies deepest and the air is sharp enough to draw blood from your lips. But that year, winter comes early. Ice forms along the river before the leaves have finished falling. Snow lays its weight upon the village roofs in thick, gleaming blankets, and the wind, oh, the wind, is restless, circling, curling, testing the shutters at night as if searching.
It begins with whispers, not words, not yet, but threads of sound that weave through the howl of the storm. They seem to rise and fall with her breath, to pause when she listens, to resume when she drifts towards sleep. At first, she tells herself it is nothing. But then, walking alone by the frozen lake, she feels it again. A pulse of air against her neck, and the faintest trace of a voice. Not threatening, not demanding, just aware. It leaves her skin tingling long after the air has stilled. And though she knows she should not, she waits for it the next day. Winter deepens. The days shrink until the sun barely lifts above the horizon, casting only a weak silver glow before retreating. The nights are long and full of sound, the groaning of ice shifting under the lake, the creak of trees under snow's weight, and always, always the wind. One night, when the storm is loud enough to drown all else, she wakes to find her window rimmed with frost in the shape of spirals, delicate, deliberate, like the trace of a fingertip. She sits up, heart quickening, and feels it again. That presence, standing unseen at the edge of the room, as though the night itself has stepped inside. She should call out. She should light the lamp. Instead, she draws in a breath that tastes of distant snowfields, sharp and pure, and whispers into the dark. I hear you. The wind stirs, just enough to make the frost glitter in the moonlight, and for the briefest heartbeat, it feels like someone smiling. The elders will tell you the north wind is only a story. But the ones who dream, the ones who walk alone under the auroras, the ones who listen to the snow as if it speaks, they know better. In the far north, the wind is never just wind. It is a watcher, a wanderer, a lover waiting for the one who will answer his call. And perhaps this winter, that one has already been found.
Her name was Anya. She had been born in the village and had never set foot beyond the shadow of its pines. Yet she carried within her a quiet hunger for something unnamed. She was not restless in the loud way of those who openly dream of travel, but in the slow, simmering way of a soul that knows it is meant to belong somewhere else. She lived alone now. Her parents had gone 2 winters ago, taken by the same fever that sometimes swept through the village when the cold was deepest. She had no husband, no children. The women her age often pitied her in the quiet, sideways way villagers do. Yet Anya did not share their pity. She had her small cabin, her fire, her nets for fishing under the ice. She had silence, and she had the lake. Every morning she walked its edge, even when the cold was so sharp it cracked the surface ice with sounds like distant thunder. She would stand there, looking across the frozen expanse, her breath blooming in pale clouds, and listen. Some days there was nothing but the brittle stillness of winter. Other days, she thought she heard the wind moving low over the lake, curling around her as if testing her scent. She never spoke of it. The villagers were not kind to those who claimed to hear the north wind. Old tales warned that acknowledging him was the first step to losing oneself. But she had always been drawn to the forbidden. Her eyes were the color of the river in thaw, clear but with a shadow of green beneath the surface. Her hair was dark and heavy, almost black, and she often left it unbound when she walked outside, letting it whip freely in the wind. She said it made her feel less like she was fighting the cold and more like she was moving with it. She carried her own firewood, repaired her own roof, and spoke little. People mistook this for hardness, but it was something else. She guarded her tenderness like embers in the ash, only stirring them when the right spark came. The north wind had begun to notice.
He had no name in the way mortals understand names, but in every tongue there was a word for him, and each one was spoken with a mixture of reverence and caution. He was not merely a weather, but an old and sovereign force. He had shaped mountains, carved valleys, and stripped forests bare in his wandering. Yet, for all his violence, there was in him the capacity for stillness so deep it could make the air hum. He was not bound by form. Sometimes he was nothing more than the sound of ice shifting across a plain. Other times he was the shadow that moved through the storm, the shape glimpsed between flurries. When he chose to take a shape, it was often that of a man carved from winter itself, skin pale as moonlight on snow, hair like drifting frost, eyes as clear and dangerous as glacial ice. When he looked upon Anya from the edge of his realm, he did not see a fragile mortal to claim and keep. He saw a quiet strength, the sort that could withstand centuries without breaking.
and in her gaze he sensed something that stirred even his ancient heart, a longing to belong to a place she had never touched. Their meetings began in the smallest ways. When she walked home at dusk, the wind would rise behind her, chasing loose strands of her hair and curling them forward across her cheek. Sometimes she would pause, her mittened hand brushing it back slowly, as if savoring the feel. He liked that she did not rush inside as others would. At night she dreamed. Dreams in which she stood on a ridge of ice, beneath skies alight with auroras. Dreams in which she felt the cool press of fingers against the inside of her wrist, steadying her as if she stood at the very edge of the world. Dreams in which she turned her head and caught the scent of winter air untouched by human breath. She would wake with her lips parted, her pulse quickened, her body tingling with a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. Others noticed subtle changes in her. The fur on her coat seemed to frost more easily, as though snow clung to her longer than it should. Her cheeks held a glow even on days when she barely lit the hearth. And when the wind howled at night, she no longer shut her shutters tightly. But there were warnings, too.
Old Mikhail, who had lost his sister in a storm when they were children, told her not to linger by the lake. "The wind is listening," he said, his voice low. "Once it hears your name, it will not let it go." Katya, her neighbor, brought her bread one morning and stayed long enough to watch her eat it. "You've been dreaming strange things," Katya said softly, not asking, but stating. "It's how it begins." Anya only smiled. "And how does it end?" Katya didn't answer. She only glanced toward the window, where frost was forming in delicate spirals, and shivered. The days passed, each one colder than the last. The sun barely rose before sinking again, and the moon hung full and pale over the snowfields like an unblinking eye. The north wind grew bolder. When she walked home in the evenings, he would swirl ahead of her, tugging her scarf loose, brushing the curve of her jaw with cold so sharp it felt like a kiss. Once, when she stopped in the middle of the path to catch her breath, the wind wrapped around her from behind, holding her there for a long, unbroken moment. She closed her eyes and leaned back into it. It was not warmth she felt, it was exhilaration. There is a moment in every winter when the snow no longer feels like an intrusion, but like a world of its own, self-contained and complete. Anya had reached that moment. Her days were lived as before, mending nets, fetching water, splitting wood. But her nights and her solitary walks were no longer hers alone. She was being watched. She was being sought. And somewhere in the vast expanse of white beyond the lake, the north wind was waiting for the time to step fully into her life. The storm came without warning. It was not the kind that creeps in on the horizon with darkened skies and whispering gusts.
This one descended as if the heavens had split, spilling snow and wind in a fury so sudden the villagers barely had time to bar their doors. The air was a white, churning veil, and the wind howled so fiercely it seemed alive, not in the distant way of winter, but in the intimate way of something pressing against your very skin. Anya stood at her window, watching. The snow swirled in strange, almost deliberate patterns, spirals and arcs that reminded her of the frost marks on her glass. And then, through the blinding white, she saw him. He was not a solid figure, not yet, but a shifting shadow within the storm, his outline flowing and reforming like smoke in a breeze. Still, she knew, even without a face, even without eyes, she knew. The wind rose in a sudden rush, rattling the shutters, and she heard it, a voice carried not in words, but in tones that curled through her chest and along her spine. It was deep, low, and endless, like the echo of mountains speaking to each other beneath the snow. Come. She stepped back from the window, heart pounding. The voice was not outside anymore. It was inside her, blooming in her mind with a cold clarity that made the room feel smaller. She told herself she was imagining it, that the wind was only the wind. But when she lay down that night, the dreams came stronger. In them, she walked barefoot across a plain of snow that did not sting her skin. The air was clear, the sky alive with ribbons of green and violet light. Ahead, a figure waited. This time he had shape, a tall man with hair the color of new frost, strands catching the aurora's blow. His eyes were pale, almost silver, and when they met hers, she felt her breath falter. "You are not afraid," he said, though his lips did not move. "I should be," she answered, "but you are not." She woke with the taste of cold on her tongue, and her fingers curled as if she had been holding his hand. From then on, the days carried his presence. A sudden gust when she left her cabin, tugging her scarf loose. A pause in the wind when she stood alone on the lake, as if it waited for her to speak. The strange way her footsteps sometimes vanished behind her, almost instantly, erased by the drifting snow. Fear had its place. She knew the stories, the warnings, the women who had never returned. But craving grew beside it, bright and dangerous. She found herself lingering outside longer, listening for that low hum that meant he was near. Sometimes she thought he felt him just behind her, his breath cool against the curve of her ear, though no one was there when she turned. One evening, after a day when the wind had been particularly fierce, she found her cabin door unlatched. Inside, the fire was still burning, but the air was cool enough to raise gooseflesh on her arms. On the table lay a single white feather, impossibly light, rimed with frost that did not melt even when she touched it. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. That night, the dream was different. She stood at the edge of a cliff made entirely of ice, looking down into a valley where clouds swirled like a restless sea. He appeared beside her without sound, his presence filling the air. When he spoke, his voice curled around her name like smoke. I can give you more than this. She turned to him. More than what? More than the weight of years, more than the cold that steals your strength, more than the loneliness you pretend does not ache. The wind lifted her hair, brushing it across her lips like a touch. She closed her eyes, breathing in the sharpness of him, a scent like the first breath before a snowstorm, clean and electric. You would keep me? She asked. Forever. You would not fade. You would not break. I would wrap you in my storms, and no frost would harm you. You would be mine.
His voice was not pleading. It was certain, inevitable, as if the choice had already been made, and only her lips had yet to confirm it. She stepped closer, the air between them humming. And what would you take from me? The earth beneath your feet, the warmth of the sun, the seasons that change. The answer came without hesitation, and it struck her like the cold itself, sharp, pure, undeniable. When she woke, her cheeks were flushed, her pulse heavy in her throat. The room felt too small, the walls too close. She went to the door and opened it to the night. The wind moved against her instantly, circling her ankles, climbing up her body in invisible threads. It was dangerous to linger, yet she did. She tipped her head back, letting the air slide over her throat, and whispered into the darkness, I hear you. The reply was not in words, but in sensation, a sudden rush that pressed against her like a body, surrounding her in a cold so exquisite it made her gasp. Then it was gone, leaving her breathless in the doorway, her skin tingling as though she had been kissed. The villagers began to notice more. Katya told her she looked different, her eyes brighter, her step lighter. Old Mikkel stopped her by the well to mutter that the wind had been circling her house at night. You must not answer him, he said, his voice harsh. He is not what you think. He will strip you down to nothing. But Anya had already felt the truth. He did not want to strip her away. He wanted to keep her exactly as she was, forever. Still, the choice loomed. If she stayed, she would live out her years in the village, tending fires, mending nets, growing old as all mortals do. If she went, she would surrender all of it. The touch of spring, the smell of rain, the feel of soil under bare feet, in exchange for eternity at his side. She did not yet know which was the greater loss.
The night it happened, the sky was alive. Ribbons of green and violet shimmered across the darkness, bending and twisting as if they were the pulse of something breathing above the world. The snow lay deep over the ground, untouched by any step but hers. It was cold enough that each breath left her lips like a silver cloud, yet she did not feel chilled. She felt expectant. The wind had been calling her all day, rising and falling in strange rhythms, brushing past her ear as if to murmur secrets only she could hear. When dusk came, she found herself walking toward the lake without quite deciding to go. The village lay behind her, the lights in windows small and far away. Ahead, the world was open and white, endless in all directions. At the center of the frozen lake, the air thickened. Snow began to fall, not in a wild flurry, but in slow, spiraling descent, each flake glittering as if lit from within. The silence was heavy, holding her in place. Then the wind moved, not in a gust, but in a shape. He stepped out of the snow as though it were a curtain parting to let him through. Tall, his shoulders broad but not imposing, his movements smooth as drifting ice. His hair caught the light of the aurora, strands pale and luminous, and his eyes were the pale fire of frozen water, a color that was neither blue nor silver, but something between. They held her as surely as hands might have. She should have spoken. She should have asked who he was, though she already knew. Instead, she stood very still as he came closer. The air around him was not bitter cold, but sharp, clean and alive, brushing against her skin in waves. When he reached her, he stopped close enough that she could feel the faintest thread of his breath across her cheek. It was cool, but not unpleasant, like the first breath taken after plunging into cold water, shocking and vivid. "You came," he said, though he could not be certain his lips had moved. "You called," she answered. His gaze swept over her face, lingering as if memorizing it. "You are even more than I thought." She felt heat bloom under her skin despite the cold. "What do you see?" "Someone who was never meant to belong to the small and the still. Someone who has listened for me her whole life without knowing it." His hand lifted, fingers brushing the side of her neck. The touch was cold enough to make her shiver, but beneath it was a strange heat, as though her own body rose to meet his temperature. The contrast was intoxicating, the sharp chill, the flush of blood rushing to her skin. The wind stirred around them, lifting her hair, wrapping her cloak tighter around her legs, curling upward in soft spirals. She felt it move over her like an unseen embrace, tracing the line of her shoulders, her spine, her hips. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because you do not fear what you feel." He stepped closer, closing the space between them. His other hand rose to her cheek, thumb brushing the edge of her lips. She had thought his eyes cold, but now she saw the flicker within them, like light passing deep beneath ice, warmth hidden, waiting. The snow began to fall heavier, each flake catching in her hair, clinging to her lashes before melting. The tiny drops slid down her skin, trailing along the curve of her jaw. His gaze followed them, and when one reached her mouth, he bent forward. His lips touched hers, not with heat, but with a cool that made her draw in a sharp breath. Yet within that coolness was a strange, aching pleasure, as if every nerve had been struck awake. The kiss deepened, and the wind rose, curling around them until it was all she could hear, the rush and whisper of him filling the night. She felt herself leaning into him, her hands lifting to rest against his chest. Beneath her palms he felt solid, real, but with a vibration beneath the surface, as if he were only partly bound to flesh.
When the kiss broke, her breath came quickly, mingling with his in pale clouds. "I could keep you here," he murmured, "in my world where the snow never fades and the nights are lit by the sky's own fire. You would not grow old, you would not lose me." And what would I lose? The sound of spring rain, the scent of earth after it, the taste of fruit warmed by the sun. You would remember them, but they would never touch you again. His words were not meant to frighten, but they pressed against her chest with their weight. Still, she found herself unable to step back. He moved behind her, the air following like a tide, and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned into him instinctively, the cold of his body pressing against her back, the wind curling along her throat, her jaw, her ear. His voice was low and close, each syllable a vibration through her bones. "You have already begun to belong to me," he said. The truth of it stole her breath. She felt it, the way her body had learned to seek the cold, the way her heart raced when the wind rose, the way her dreams no longer belonged solely to her. The world around them blurred. She did not know if they were still on the lake or if the snow beneath her feet was now the floor of some vast crystalline hall. She glimpsed light above, not the aurora now, but something brighter, flickering across vaulted arches of ice. The air hummed with power, and she realized they had crossed, if only for a moment, into his realm. Here the cold was not a threat, but a living presence, wrapping around her in layers. She felt it slip beneath her cloak, over her skin, across her collarbone, her wrists, her palms. It was intimate, invasive, and yet it drew from her a sigh rather than a shiver. She turned in his arms to face him again, her hands resting against the curve of his jaw. His skin was smooth, cool, almost damp like snow packed under the hand. His eyes searched hers, and in them she saw no malice, no deceit, only the kind of certainty that comes from centuries of wanting and waiting. "Say the word," he told her. "Say you will stay." Her lips parted, but no answer came. She was balanced on the edge of a choice that would break the life she had known or the life she could have.
Her heart pounded with the knowledge that whichever path she chose, there would be no turning back. Still she leaned forward and kissed him again, longer this time, deeper, until the world around her vanished and there was nothing but the feel of him, the taste of air that had never touched the earth, the rush of the wind moving through her as if she were hollow and he meant to fill her. When they broke apart, she was trembling, not from cold, but from the ache of knowing she could no longer imagine a life without him. And though she had not yet spoken, they both knew.
The world between them felt as thin as frost. Anya stood in the center of the frozen lake, or perhaps she no longer stood there at all. The sky above was no longer only the aurora. It was a ceiling of light shifting through blues and silvers, its glow catching on walls of ice that curved upward into infinity. She could feel the air breathing with him, the ground beneath them humming with his presence. He held her face between his hands, his thumbs grazing her cheeks, his eyes searching hers as though looking for a signal beyond words. He said, "Choose." The word was not harsh, but it carried the weight of a mountain. She knew there would be no asking twice, no delay granted. The moment was here, the moment when she would either surrender her life to him or let him vanish from it forever. Her thoughts tangled in themselves. She saw the village, her small cabin with its rough walls and warm hearth, the smell of burning pine, the creak of her bed in the stillness of night. She saw Katya smiling at her doorway, old Mikhail muttering over his fishing lines, the small patterns of ordinary days. And then she saw his world, the air sharp and clean, the sky alive every night, the absence of time gnawing at nothing. A place where she would never feel her bones ache with age, where her beauty would never fade, where she would never be alone, not truly, so long as he wrapped his storms around her. But she also knew what he had told her, the earth's scent after rain, the heat of the summer sun against bare skin, the thaw of spring, the rustle of leaves in autumn. If she chose him, she would never feel those again. The cold wind stirred between them, curling around her ankles, rising to circle her waist, brushing along her hair like a lover's fingers. It was a plea without words. "You could make me happy," she whispered. His mouth curved faintly, but not in victory. "I could make you mine." It was both promise and warning.
Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. Slowly, she reached for his hands, pulling them from her face and holding them between her own. His fingers were cool, solid, threaded with something that felt like the very current of the air. "If I come with you," she asked, "will you keep me as I am? Will I still be myself?" "You will be more," he said. She closed her eyes. For a moment there was no sound but the low hum of the wind against the ice. And then, softly, she said the word, "Yes."
It was as if the world sighed. The wind surged upward in a spiral, lifting her hair, pulling at her cloak. Snow rose from the ground in swirling ribbons, wrapping around her legs, her arms, her body. It was not biting cold, but a deep penetrating chill that seemed to seep into her very bones, replacing something mortal with something else entirely. She gasped as it filled her, the sensation sharp and sweet at once, like stepping into icy water and finding it warms you from within. Her breath came in pale, luminous clouds that lingered in the air. She felt the beating of her heart slow, not in weakness, but in strength, each pulse resonating with the rhythm of the wind itself. When the snow settled, she looked down at her hands. Her skin was no longer flushed with warmth. It was pale, almost luminous in the soft light. The lines on her palms had faded, smoothed away, as if time had been erased from her. Her hair glinted with frost, but it was not brittle. It shimmered like strands of silvered silk. She lifted her gaze to him. He was smiling now, but there was something in his eyes, not triumph, but relief, as though he had feared she would turn away at the last moment. He stepped closer, resting his forehead against hers, and she felt the air around them still. For the first time since she had known him, the wind was utterly calm. "You are mine now," he said softly. "And you are mine," she answered.
He laughed, a low, rare sound, and the wind stirred again, carrying them upward. She felt her feet leave the ground, the air lifting her, wrapping around her like an unseen cloak. Below, the lake and the village shrank until they were nothing but shadows in the white. Above, the light of his realm opened like a door, and they passed through. The holes of his palace were carved from ice so clear they seemed made of captured air. Light from the aurora poured through the walls, bending into colors that painted the floors and her skin. The air here was crisp and bright, every breath filling her as if with energy rather than merely air. There was no fire, but she was not cold. She realized she would never be cold again, nor warm in the way she once knew. She had entered a place beyond such measures. He led her through the vast space, his hand steady around hers. When they stopped at the center of a great chamber, the ceiling arched high above them like the sky, and she could see the stars through it, impossibly close. "This is your home now," he told her. She looked around at the endless beauty, the way the air shimmered faintly, the stillness that was not empty but alive. She knew then that she had crossed into forever. There would be no growing older, no decay, no endings. And yet, somewhere, deep in her, a quiet ache stirred. It was not regret, not yet. It was the knowledge that the world she had left behind was gone to her now, as unreachable as the sun in summer. He drew her close, his arms wrapping around her. The sensation was unlike any embrace she had ever known, firm and consuming, his presence pressing into her from all directions, as if the storm itself had enfolded her. "You will never be alone again," he said. She believed him, but as she rested her head against him, she thought of the smell of pine in spring, the murmur of water in a thawing stream, the sound of rain on a summer roof. They were memories now, and they would fade, as all mortal things do. Still, she had chosen. When they kissed again, it was with the weight of that choice between them, a kiss that was not warm, but deep, as if the cold itself had become something she could crave. Far below in the village, the wind moved over the roofs, rattling shutters, slipping through narrow streets. Some swore they heard laughter in it. Others thought it was only the storm. But in one small cabin, a white feather lay on the windowsill, rimed in frost that never melted.
Eternity does not rush. It moves like the slow drift of snow across an endless plain, patient and quiet, reshaping the world grain by grain. I do not count the years now. I no longer could if I tried. The seasons beyond this realm are not mine to know. The rivers may thaw and freeze again 100 times over. The forests may grow and fall to ash, but I am here, and the sky above my home is always lit with the long, curling flames of the aurora. They call it his palace. I have learned to call it our sky. Walls of ice rise and twist, casting pale blue shadows by day, and at night they become windows into forever. In those first nights, I would stand at the highest arch, watching the lights dance, wondering if somewhere far below the village still existed as I remembered it. At first I dreamed of them, of the smell of bread in my mother's kitchen, of Katja's voice calling from outside my door, of the soft heat of a fire at my back. I dreamed of warm hands, of rain running down my hair, of grass brushing my bare legs in the summer fields. Those dreams came less often as the years, if they were years, passed. Now they come like faint echoes, and sometimes I wake unsure if they are memories or only stories I once told myself. He never asks about them. The north wind is not cruel, but neither does he dwell on what was before. His presence fills each moment so completely there is no space left for longing, unless I choose to make it. We walk across frozen lakes, under skies so clear they seem carved from glass. We move through forests where each branch wears a cloak of white, so delicate it seems spun from light itself. When he laughs, the sound shivers through the air like sleigh bells far away. When he kisses me, I feel the rush of the wind in my chest, fierce and claiming, as if my heart itself has been carried into the sky. I am not cold here. That was the first surprise. The frost that rims my hair, the ice that clings to my lashes, the snow that settles on my skin, none of it bites. It is part of me now. I no longer think of warmth and cold as opposites. I am simply in the state I am meant to be. And yet, there is something else. I do not age. My reflection in the ice is as it was on the night I chose him. But the stillness that comes with this immortality has a taste, one I sometimes notice only when the palace falls quiet, when the storms subside and the aurora is slow and dim. It is the taste of time holding its breath. Sometimes I wonder if this is what it means to be a story,
to live outside the rhythm of birth and death, to have no beginning or ending anymore, only a middle that stretches into the horizon. There is beauty in it, there is also a weight. He notices when my thoughts drift. The wind stills, and he touches my face with a gentleness that is at odds with the violence of the storms he commands. "You are here," he says, and there is a finality to it that soothes and binds me. And I am here. I will always be here. There are moments when I think I hear the outside world calling, not in words, but in sensations. The phantom smell of pine needles, the imagined sound of summer rain tapping against a roof, the memory of bare feet on warm earth. They pass quickly, like shadows crossing the snow, and he never asks me what stirs my gaze toward the horizon. I do not tell him that in those moments I almost believe I could step outside this eternity and walk back into the life I left. But I also know that if I did, the absence of him would hollow me out. The storms would no longer sing to me. The winter would no longer feel like a lover's touch, and that absence would be a colder thing than any ice. So I stay. And perhaps this is what choice means in the end. Not that it is made once, but that it is remade each day. I wake, I walk the frozen plains, I stand in the curve of his arms, and I choose again. They say the north wind takes a bride once each century. I am no longer certain what a century is, or how many have passed since the night he came for me. But I know that somewhere, far below, snow still falls on villages, shutters still rattle in winter storms, and mortals still tell stories when the wind howls against their windows.
Perhaps they speak of me now, not by name, but as a figure glimpsed in the distance when the snow swallows the horizon. A woman with hair like frost and eyes that reflect the shifting lights of the northern sky. Perhaps they wonder if I am a warning or a promise. I do not know what they decide. When I stand at the edge of the highest arch in the palace, the wind coiling lazily around me, I sometimes think I hear their voices, and I wonder, if I were to lean forward, if I were to let the wind carry me down through the clouds, would I find my village unchanged, waiting for me as though I had only stepped away for an evening? But I know better. Time runs differently there. I would be a stranger in a place that was once mine. The hearth would be cold, the names forgotten, the faces changed. The only thing that would know me would be the wind itself. And so, when the storms rise, I lift my face to them. I let them whip through my hair, rush past my skin, curl around my throat like a necklace only he could give. I let them remind me that I belong to this, to him, to the winter, to the sky. From below, the storm is only a storm, but within it, I am the bride of the north wind, and his voice is the only one I answer to. If you stand outside on a winter night, when the snow is falling thick and the wind sweeps across the fields, you may think you see movement in the white, a shadow, a figure,
a glimmer of silver hair. You may feel the air press gently against your cheek, like a cold hand caressing your skin. It might be nothing. Or it might be me, watching from the edge of the storm. And if in that moment you hear a whisper, soft, almost tender, calling your name, know that you are not mistaken. The wind remembers. It always remembers.